He nearly died that night, lost, alone, and drowning in his own despair. And I was the fool who pulled him out. I stayed when everyone else gave up on him, patching his wounds while mine bled quietly. I fed him hope with my own trembling hands, whispered dreams into his ears while burying mine. He said I was his angel. I believed him. But the truth is, I was just a stepping stone. And when he found firmer ground, he left me in the mud, like I never mattered at all. We met in winter, fittingly, when everything felt cold and uncertain. He was lost, jobless, shattered by betrayal. I had just enough warmth in me to share. I offered him shelter, meals, love, everything I could. I didn't see it then, but I became his lifeline. Every plan he made, I supported. Every rejection he faced, I softened. I didn't ask for much, just loyalty. But even that, it turns out, was too expensive for a man chasing his own survival. He used to look at me like I was his entire world. Now I wonder if that world ever existed, or if he just needed someone to orbit around until he found better stars. I remember the little things, how he'd kiss my forehead before leaving for interviews, how I'd stay up past midnight editing his resume, coaching him on answers. "You're the reason I'm still fighting," he once whispered. And somehow that became my anchor, until the day he stopped coming home. When he landed his dream job, we celebrated with cheap wine and wide-eyed plans. "We made it," he said, and I smiled, foolishly thinking we meant us. I didn't notice the way he started pulling away. Calls unanswered. Weekends too busy. My texts slowly became ghosts on his screen. He was rising, yes, but the higher he climbed, the more invisible I became. Until one day, I realized I wasn't part of the future he was building. I was just part of the past he wanted to forget. I found out through a friend. A dinner party I wasn't invited to. Photos I wasn't tagged in. He sat beside a woman I'd never seen before, his arm around her, smiling like nothing had ever broken him. I stared at the screen for hours, trying to remember the last time he held me like that. The silence between us had grown so loud, I mistook it for peace. But it was abandonment. Quiet, cruel abandonment. I confronted him, shaking, shattered, still hoping for an explanation that might make the betrayal hurt less. He didn't even deny it. "You helped me when I needed it," he said, like I was a donation, a temporary fix. But people grow. He meant he grew, out of me, past me, without me. I stood there, watching him walk away without flinching. No guilt, no regret, just distance. And that's when I knew I hadn't lost a partner. I'd lost the illusion of one. The pain was surgical, not loud, but precise, cutting me open from the inside out. Days blurred, nights screamed. I replayed every moment, wondering what I missed, what I wasn't, what I lacked. And then something snapped, not in rage, but in clarity. I had given him everything, and he gave me silence. That wasn't love. That was exploitation. And I'd had enough of bleeding for someone who never intended to stay. So I stopped waiting for apologies. I stopped rereading texts. I stopped begging memories to change their endings. I took everything he left behind, his broken promises, my bruised pride, and started rebuilding, not for revenge, not yet, but for me, piece by piece. I enrolled in the program I once gave up for him. I started sleeping again, deep, dreamless sleep, and for the first time in years, I looked in the mirror and didn't see a shadow. I saw a woman who had been dragged through hell and was still standing, and that's where the story really begins. The woman I used to be, quiet, compliant, endlessly forgiving, she died the day he left without a backward glance. What rose in her place wasn't bitter. She was focused, steady, done living life in the shadows of someone else's ambition. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped softening my voice. And with every step I took forward, I felt pieces of him fall off me like dead skin. I threw out the hoodie he left behind, the one I used to wear on cold nights just to feel close to him. I deleted every photo that made me ache. I unfollowed, muted, erased. It was a purge, but not one done in anger. It was sacred, necessary. My healing wasn't loud. It was methodical. I was no longer clinging to what could have been. I was preparing for what would be. Without him, my days became a ritual of reclaiming. Early mornings with black coffee and sharper boundaries. Classes where I no longer felt like someone's shadow. I started writing again, something I'd shelved for his dreams. And in every sentence, I poured the pain out like poison. It didn't vanish overnight, but it lost its grip. Slowly, I was becoming the version of myself he never believed in, the one I buried to make space for his comfort. Then I saw him again, months later, in a cafe I used to love but avoided after the breakup. He didn't recognize me at first. I'd changed, cut my hair, stood straighter, eyes no longer carrying the weight of needing his love. He smiled, unsure, as if trying to place where he'd seen me. That uncertainty felt better than any apology. I walked past him, silent, head high. That moment, it was the spark that lit the fire of my revenge. But my revenge wouldn't be petty. It wouldn't be loud. It would be brilliant, undeniable, and poetic. I remembered the startup idea he once mocked me for, said it was too ambitious. I pulled out the old notes I'd scribbled, cleaned them up, pitched the concept to a mentor I met in my program. Within weeks, I was accepted into an accelerator. What he dismissed as a dream was now my blueprint to rise. I worked relentlessly. No distractions. Just me, my purpose, and the echo of every time he said, "You're not ready." I was ready now. I networked. I pitched. I failed. I learned. Every no sharpened me. Every win fueled me. I stopped craving validation and started creating results. I didn't want him to regret losing me. I wanted him to see what he never truly had. The startup took off slowly, but steadily. First, a small feature in a local magazine. Then a viral post that brought in investors. I stayed grounded, focused. No over-celebrating, no announcing. Just progress. Until the day his company reached out to me. Through a third party. Unaware it was me they were courting for a collaboration. I read the email 3 times, smiling. This was it. The full circle moment. My revenge was here, served cold and perfect. I accepted the meeting without hesitation. I walked into that boardroom with confidence stitched into every step. He was there. His eyes widened, lips parted, stunned. He didn't expect me. The woman he left behind wasn't supposed to come back stronger. He looked at me like I was a ghost. I sat down, crossed my legs, and said, "Let's begin." Power had never tasted so sweet. He tried to act unfazed, but his hands trembled when he reached for his water. I watched him, silent, calm, while he pitched the same corporate jargon he used to mock. I let him speak, nodding politely. Then I pulled out my proposal, clear, bold, undeniable. Every word was a reflection of the woman he underestimated. I saw the moment realization hit him. I didn't need his validation. I was the prize now. I ended the meeting with a firm handshake and a smile. I'll have my team follow up. Not me, my team. Because that's who I'd become. A woman with a vision, a business, and a backbone he never earned. As I walked out, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. My revenge wasn't about hurting him. It was about rising so far above, he could never reach me again. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't even celebrate. I just sat quietly in my apartment, sipping tea, staring out at the city lights. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. I hadn't just proven something to him. I had proven something to myself. That I could break, rebuild, and bloom in the very soil where he left me to rot. People began to notice. The ones who once pitied me now asked for advice. Former friends who vanished during my breakdowns came circling back, drawn to the light I'd lit for myself. But I kept my circle small, clean. I had learned, some people come close just to siphon your strength. I wasn't that naive girl anymore. I gave trust sparingly, and I gave myself fully to no one but me. He messaged me, eventually. A simple, I saw the article. Congrats. I always knew you had it in you. I stared at the screen, unmoved. He didn't know. If he had, he wouldn't have walked away. That message wasn't admiration. It was nostalgia mixed with regret. But I didn't need his regrets. I needed nothing from him. I left the message on read. That silence was my final punctuation. Months passed. My company grew. So did I. I started traveling, speaking at conferences, telling my story, not to shame him, but to show others like me that heartbreak isn't the end. It's a turning point. I shared the parts that hurt, the nights I couldn't breathe, the days I wanted to disappear. And I shared how I kept walking anyway. That's what resonated. Not the revenge, but the rebirth. At one event, a young woman came up to me, eyes glassy, clutching her notebook. "Your story saved me," she whispered. And suddenly, all the pain had meaning. I had turned my scars into someone else's survival map. That's when I knew I wasn't just healing for me. I was healing for every woman who'd ever been left behind, who thought love meant sacrificing yourself. I was showing them there was another way. One night, I found an old video on my phone, him playing guitar on my couch, barefoot, laughing. For a second, I felt it, the ache of nostalgia, the softness of memory. But it passed like a wave that doesn't linger. I didn't delete the video. I just watched it one last time, then tucked it away, not because I missed him, but because I forgave the girl who loved him. She did the best she could. She deserved peace too. That peace grew in the quiet, in my own space, in my own arms. I stopped needing noise to feel alive. I stopped chasing closure in places that only offered echoes. I began to write a book, not about him, but about the journey, about turning pain into purpose, about how it's not the betrayal that defines us, but how we rise from it. And I wrote with truth. No bitterness, no victimhood, just clarity. Then came the magazine cover. My face, my story, front and center. The caption read, "From heartbreak to empire. How she rose after being left behind." It was surreal, but also deserved. I didn't feel imposter syndrome. I felt arrival. Every tear, every doubt, every late night had led here. And no one could take it from me. Least of all the man who once thought I'd never stand without him. I didn't send him the magazine. I didn't block him either. Let him see. Let him watch from a distance as I became everything he never believed I could. Let him realize that the woman he left behind didn't just survive. She transformed. And now she was untouchable. Not because she was bitter, but because she no longer needed anything from anyone who couldn't love her right. I wasn't waiting for karma anymore. I was karma. I moved into a new apartment overlooking the skyline, a space filled with sunlight, silence, and soul. No memories haunted the walls. Everything inside reflected who I had become. Bold art, books with spines worn from rereading, a desk where dreams were turned into deadlines. This wasn't a place built for someone else's comfort. It was mine. Every inch of it screamed freedom. One morning, I found myself humming while cooking, something I hadn't done in years. Not because of any particular joy, but because peace had finally settled into my bones. I was no longer reacting to my past. I was simply existing in my present. That, I realized, was the true revenge. Living fully, authentically, unapologetically. He tried again, of course. Another message. This one longer. Apologetic. Reminiscent. He wrote about how he missed us, how he didn't realize what he had until it was gone. Typical. Convenient, now that I had something to offer the world. I didn't reply. Not because I hated him, but because I had outgrown the version of me who would have. Closure doesn't always come wrapped in an apology. Sometimes it's a quiet morning when you no longer care. Sometimes it's walking past the ghost of a memory and feeling nothing at all. I didn't need to burn bridges. I simply stopped crossing them. And that shift, that was my liberation. People often asked, "Don't you want him to see what he lost?" But the truth was, I no longer centered my worth around his regret. My life wasn't a performance for his punishment. It was a celebration of my return. I didn't want him to want me back. I wanted me back. And I had her now, in full, in power, in peace. I started mentoring other women, those navigating the aftermath of being abandoned, betrayed, broken. I didn't offer them cliches. I offered truth. Your heartbreak isn't your ending. I'd say, it's your origin story. And they believed me, not because I was perfect, but because I was proof that you can lose everything and still rise. Then came the speaking tour. Cities, crowds, stories poured into auditoriums. I stood on those stages not as a victim, but as a warrior. I shared my scars, not for pity, but to show that survival isn't shameful. It's sacred. The applause wasn't just for my success. It was for every silent woman who saw herself in my words and finally felt seen. One day, I passed by our old apartment building. For a second, my breath caught in my throat. The balcony where we used to drink wine. The lobby where he kissed my forehead before leaving for interviews. But instead of sorrow, I smiled. That place wasn't home anymore. I was home now. In myself. In my story. In the life I built from the ashes of his departure. I thought of him, occasionally. Not with anger, not even with sadness. Just as a chapter that ended. A necessary villain in my hero's arc. And honestly, I hoped he found peace too. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. Carrying resentment is a chain. Forgiveness, even silent and unseen, was how I unlocked my own freedom. And freedom looked good on me. It was in the way I laughed without looking over my shoulder. In the way I trusted myself again. In the way I filled rooms with presence, not apology. I wasn't just reborn. I was rebuilt, brick by brick, stronger than ever. And this time, no one could take that from me. The book launched quietly but caught fire quickly. Word of mouth, book clubs, interviews. It wasn't the writing alone that moved people. It was the raw truth. Readers messaged me saying they cried, they healed, they left toxic relationships because my story reminded them of their worth. That kind of impact, it's louder than any revenge could ever be. I was invited to speak at a university. Ironically, the same one where he had once studied, the one I helped fund silently while he pursued his dream. Walking those halls again, now as a guest of honor, felt like reclaiming sacred ground. I wasn't just rewriting the narrative. I was living the sequel. Backstage before my speech, I looked into the mirror. No longer the girl with trembling hands and swollen eyes. I saw poise. purpose, power. I smiled at my reflection, not needing anyone else to validate that I'd made it. My scars weren't hidden, they were part of my armor now. They shimmered in the spotlight. The lecture hall was packed. When I shared how I once sacrificed everything for someone who didn't see me, I felt the entire room inhale. When I followed it with how I rose, alone, into everything I had dreamed of becoming, I saw eyes widen, hands clap, heads nod. They didn't pity me, they admired me. And that made every ounce of pain feel worth it. Afterward, a professor approached me. He said, "Your story should be taught here, not just as inspiration, but as a lesson in resilience." I thanked him, holding back tears. Not because I was sad, but because the journey had brought me full circle. I didn't just escape the fire. I had built something from its embers. Outside, as the crowd thinned, I saw him, standing at a distance, older, thinner, holding a copy of my book like it was too heavy to carry. Our eyes met, just for a second, and then I turned and walked away. Not out of cruelty, but because I didn't need anything from that moment. I had already said everything that mattered, with my success, my survival, and my silence. That walk away was everything. My heels clicking against the pavement, my heart beating steady. Not anxious, not aching, but alive. The kind of alive that comes from finally choosing yourself. That was the moment I knew I wasn't a side character in someone else's ambition anymore. I was the author now, and I was writing my own ending. I went home that night and poured a glass of wine, not to numb pain, but to toast progress. I lit a candle, sat by the window, and breathed in the peace I had earned. I looked at my hands, the same ones that once held his dreams. Now, they held my own, and they weren't trembling anymore. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I journaled, stretched, made coffee. There were no flashbacks. No checking my phone, hoping for closure. Just stillness. Just now. That's when I knew I was free. Not because he apologized, not because I got even, but because I let go completely. Finally. Beautifully. Healing didn't look like fireworks. It looked like soft mornings, steady hearts, and unshakable joy. It looked like me, finally whole, no longer defined by who left, but by the woman who stayed, rebuilt, and rose. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the day he walked out, I didn't cry. I didn't reminisce. I didn't even remember until halfway through the day. That's when it hit me. Healing isn't loud. It's not a triumphant shout. It's the quiet forgetting of the dates that once broke you. And in that moment, I smiled. I was living proof that time, when met with intention, can turn wounds into wisdom. I hosted a small dinner party that night. Close friends, candles, laughter echoing through the room, like music. The kind of joy I once thought I'd never feel again. These weren't pity friends. These were people who saw me, who celebrated the woman I had become. We toasted to growth, to peace, to choosing yourself without apology. One of them asked, "If you could go back, would you change anything?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said, because I had to lose everything to learn that I was never really lost. I just hadn't found me yet. And that was the truth. The pain, the betrayal, the lonely nights, they were all necessary chapters in a story that led to this peace. I no longer feared love. I just no longer sought it at the expense of myself. If it came, it would have to match me, not shrink me, not dim me. And until then, I was already full, already whole. I didn't need to be chosen. I had chosen myself. That choice became my foundation. My work continued to flourish, not because I chased success, but because I created from truth. Every project, every speech, every word I wrote carried the weight of my past and the light of my future. My story was no longer about him. It was about every woman who'd ever been told she wasn't enough and decided to become more anyway. I visited the beach one morning, early when the tide was low and the world still quiet. I wrote my name in the sand, not his, not ours, just mine. And as the water swept it away, I didn't feel loss. I felt release. Because names fade, memories fade, but who you become, that stays. I started a foundation soon after to help women reclaim their lives after betrayal. Not to tell them what to do, but to remind them what they're made of. Steel and fire. Grace and grit. I wasn't just healing myself anymore. I was helping others rewrite their endings too. Every so often, I'd receive messages from strangers saying, "I left because of you." And I'd reply, not with advice, but with encouragement. "You didn't leave because of me." I'd say, "You left because you remembered who you were." That was the mission now. Not revenge, not regret, but remembrance. Years later, someone asked me who he was, and I paused, genuinely struggling to recall the version of him that hurt me, because time hadn't erased him. Growth had. He was no longer a villain in my story, just a catalyst, a necessary storm that forced me to build a better shelter. And I did. I built it in my heart, my voice, my life. I wasn't waiting for him to look back anymore. I was too busy looking forward. Reborn. Unshaken. Glowing from the inside out. And if he ever saw me now, all he'd be able to say is, "She's become someone I could never reach again."